we have a certain number of men entering the seminary today who are there because of the Catholic Church's teaching on celibacy, of evidence to support the case showing that he was discriminated against based upon his heterosexual orientation. He was perceived again as a threat for the homosexual culture. Joe, this is really a David versus Goliath. This is what will happen. They'll try to bankrupt you so that you give up and go away. To be honest with you, Joe, I think the only chance the church is going to fix this is if the church elects.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Recently, Father Gene Gomulka put out an article over at Complicit Clergy. Ordination does not impart sexual discipline. I'm going to put a link to it below or in the show notes, and it gives us a bit of a further update on the Anthony Gorgia case. He went to the NAC. He saw harassment firsthand. And Father Gene has spent now a career trying to raise the awareness, trying to raise the alarm about sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. And he's done what he's supposed to do. And he basically got the short end of the stick and got canceled as a result of that. He joins us now to discuss this. Father, thank you for your time. I appreciate you being on with us. So what's the story here? Give us maybe the background real quick. Bring us up to date on Anthony Gorgia. What was his story and where's the case at today?
Thank you again, Joe, for inviting me on your program. Anthony Gorgia was a seminarian at the Pontifical North American College in Rome. And during his sophomore year, he returned to New York for an operation on his spine. While he was at home, he was contacted by Cardinal Dolan, his ordinary in New York, and told that he would not be allowed to return. Well, he couldn't believe it because he'd done nothing wrong. He was an outstanding student. He had exceptional evaluations. He was doing great at the university. He was the valedictorian of his high school class. He got summa cum laude from St. John's University in philosophy. And then all of a sudden he's told he can't go back. Well, he appealed, and the cardinal 5 times turned him down to meet to explain to him what the problem was. Well, he appealed to Rome. He wrote for 2 years. The parents sent all of these letters and spent thousands of dollars to try to figure out what is going on. Well, so after investigating the case and interviewing a number of former seminarians, we were able to determine that basically he was perceived again as a threat for the homosexual culture, and which they wanted to keep under wraps because it would impact not only enrollment but also donations to the seminary. So it went to trial. And when the judge reviewed the case, the judge said, well, look, this is a church and state issue. I don't feel that I have jurisdiction. So in other words, when the judge initially ruled that she couldn't hear the case, it wasn't based upon our lack of evidence, because we had a plethora of evidence to support the case showing that he was discriminated against based upon his heterosexual orientation. Most cases, Joe, involving discrimination based on orientation, it's in the other direction. Ordinarily, a person, a homosexual, will say that he or she was discriminated against. But in this case, we're dealing with a situation where a heterosexual is discriminated against. So Anthony Gorgia's lawyer, Raymond Belair, appealed the case, but and so the problem was, though, that CNA, Catholic News Agency, when the judge dismissed the case, they reported in the media that, the case is dismissed. So at that point, the Gorgias, who were relying upon voluntary contributions to defend themselves, all of a sudden stopped because everyone thought, well, the case is thrown out. But again, that was not the case. The case is being appealed. So it's been almost 3 years now that the appeal has been going on, and it's costing more and more and more money. It's sometimes this is what will happen. They'll try to bankrupt you so that you give up and go away. In the meantime, the Gorgias continue to suffer financially, emotionally, spiritually, and so any help, financial help that they can be provided at this point in prayers would be deeply, deeply appreciated, because the case is solid. It's rock solid.
Yeah, we're going to put a link to the fundraiser over at GoFundMe, Save Our Seminarians Fund. We're going to put a link to this in the description or in the show notes, so that you could, if you can, support their efforts to continue the case. So as of right now, then, Father, exactly where is the case? I mean, like, has there been any new updates to this case? Anthony Gorgia, I mean, it's been a few years, as you said, so he's clearly had to move on with his life, but the case continues. What's the outlook? What's the hope? Is there any new developments?
Well, the lawyer just finished, I think it was last week, completing, the final, draft of the appeal, because it goes back and forth, and you have to understand, Anthony has one lawyer, a gentleman, a Catholic, my age, who is helping him, and he's going up against two large law firms, one representing the Cardinal Dolan and the Archdiocese of New York, and another law firm from Fox Rothschild that employs over 1,000 lawyers representing the North American College. So, I mean, Joe, this is really a David versus Goliath, encounter. And the only thing that saved him so far is the generosity of people who understand what he's going up against, because they realize that if he loses this case, no heterosexual seminarian in any seminary, will be safe, because they'll realize that if they get abused, or if they report abuse and they're thrown out unjustly, they don't have an appeal. They can't appeal to the Vatican, because the Vatican has their own, problems with infestation also.
It seems incredibly lopsided, to say the least. I mean, you see something, you say something. Wasn't that given to us by McCarrick, back in 2004 at the Dallas Accord? I mean, it's just like, it's a stacked deck, isn't it, Father? I mean, it just feels so hypocritical. You're trying to raise the alarm. You're trying to say something. You're trying to say, hey, look, there's wolves in sheep's clothing here. We need to do something. And yet the system seems, one, stacked against you, and two, you're falling on deaf ears. It feels incredibly unjust.
Well, at first, Joe, I first thought, well, this is a case involving Anthony Gorgia. But then in time, as I investigated more and more and more, and this was one of the reasons why I wrote that recent article, was I discovered that this has been going on for decades at the North American College. When I was there, Joe, one of the classmates, an upperclassman who came on to me, later on went back to Brooklyn, where Bishop DiMarzio put him in charge of the Safe Environment Program. Well, while he was there, almost within 1 year of being ordained, having returned from Rome, years later, a young man came forward and said that he abused him. Interestingly, another classmate who was ordained right next to me in the cathedral the same day, in July of 1974, that classmate from Rome, also from the North American College, years later was also accused by many of the altar boys in our parish of having abused them. And so what's interesting is that these classmates from the North American College were accused, in other words, they were accused of preying on young men mainly teenage boys, not long after they were ordained. And I discovered then that what really was happening was, these men whom I didn't realize were homosexuals when I was studying with them, or even Bob Kelly when I served with him in a parish for 3 years, I didn't realize that they were sexually active, in a seminary. And when you're, it's sort of like if you're addicted to drugs, to cocaine or to heroin, you're not all of a sudden one day going to wake up and stop taking drugs. So my point in my article was that statistically, it's been shown that 73% of homosexual men admit to having preyed upon, to having had sex with an adolescent. By adolescent, they would define that between 11 and 19 years old in their lives. So, in other words, Joe, if you're at the North American College or, St. Mary's in Baltimore, which is called the Pink Palace, or wherever, and you're ordained and you're a homosexual, statistically, there's a 73% chance that you're going to come on to one of your altar boys or someone in your parish.
That's crazy. That's absolutely hard to even fathom. I get wrapping my head around that is hard. I mean, so many young men like Anthony show up there believing that they have a call, that they're called to the priesthood, a life of self-sacrifice, a life of chastity, and then they're put into the grinder. How many vocations are destroyed this way, Father?
Thousands. I mean, I can give you names of so many who have gone through that grinder and are no longer around. But Joe, there's something else I discovered more recently. And that is that we have a certain number of men entering the seminary today who are there because of the Catholic Church's teaching on celibacy. Now, let me explain that, because that's a lot of people are going to have a hard time understanding this. And the best way to understand it is, if you are a member of the United Church of Christ, or you're a Protestant, and you're a homosexual, if you enter into ministry and you go assigned to a church and you're single and you're gay, the people in that congregation are immediately going to assume the fact that you're not dating girls or women, and that you're 35 or 40 years old, that you're a homosexual. But now let's say, Joe, you want to continue living in the closet. You don't want people to know that you're gay. So what is happening is this. This is a new development, which is I'm seeing happening more and more today. We have a certain number of people who are Protestants who will convert to Catholicism so they can enter the seminary, be ordained, and live in the closet. So that when if I, for example, let's say I'm an Episcopal, and the Episcopalians, remember, they have lesbian bishops too, right? So, but I don't want to be outed. So I convert to Catholicism, and I enter the seminary. So, and then I'm ordained. I'm arrive at your parish. You're going to assume perhaps that I gave up having a wife and children to follow our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. You're not going to think that I may be a closeted homosexual. You're going to think that I had this valid conversion to Catholicism, but I didn't. In other words, I see the chance of having a nice life, making money, living in a nice rectory, and still living in a closet, and maybe even being promoted to a bishop someday, because of my talents and abilities. So uh, because Protestant churches do not require celibacy, you have a better chance of being outed there than you do in the Catholic Church.
Wow, I was just thinking about, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the the Reconquista of Spain and how they needed the Spanish Inquisition to try to figure out who friend and foe was. I almost think there needs to be something similar in this circumstance. How do we determine friend or foe? You'd almost need some method in which you can analyze each individual case. But then the problem still remains that it's a hierarchical issue because there are many in the hierarchies, whether it's the NAC or the Vatican or other places, that know this goes on, turned a blind eye, or worse, are participating in it. Is there any way, can you see any way that this can all be overcome? Can we fix any of this?
To be honest with you, Joe, I think the only chance the church is going to fix this is if the church elects a straight, heterosexually oriented pope, similar to what happened, in the 16th century. If we go back in time to the 16th century, at the time of the Reformation, most Catholics don't realize that Martin Luther was excommunicated by a sexually active gay bishop. And then later on, a cardinal who was elected after him also was having sex with a 15-year-old who 2 years later, he made him a cardinal at the age of 17. So what's happening today in terms of homosexuals in the Vatican, in the papacy and so forth, this is not new. I mean, this happened, very much so back in the 16th century. But at the same time, too, Joe, if you're going to be honest, you see too that a certain number of the popes in the 16th century also fathered children. So it wasn't like that it was just a problem. That's why, Peter Damian, remember, in the 11th century, in his book of Goria, he addressed not only the problem of homosexuals, particularly, in the religious orders, but he also addressed the problem of sexually promiscuous, straight priests and bishops.
So you're saying it's possible to see an ebb and a flow here. You're saying it's possible that we could elect a solid pope in the next conclave, please God, and that would help to turn this tide around. And could we clean the house up? It seems like, for most of us, it feels like the ship has sailed and it's gotten so bad you'd have to wipe out most of the dicasteries and the curias out of the Vatican just to have the top-down leadership you need to be able to then go to the different bishops' conferences and the chanceries around the world, let alone the seminaries that need. It feels like an impossible task.
Well, I think it's a David versus Goliath, situation, because at this point, if you look at the appointments, that Pope Francis made, during his pontificate, I have a hard time finding a heterosexual in the mix, and people will sometimes write me and they say, "Well, hold it, what makes you believe that the Holy Father, is a homosexual? How can you say that? We know that Cardinal Vigano made that accusation, but how can you, support that? Where's the evidence? Show me the evidence." And my response is that, well, I've received input, from people whom I believe are actually very credible. In other words, if I can say, look, I know this Argentine priest who in 2015, when Francis was visiting the United States at the time, that he testified to two priests in a rectory at every dinner, and he recounted exactly what he witnessed in Cordoba involving the Holy Father having anal sex with a Jesuit novice. So on one hand, do I believe, and again, if a person makes this kind of accusation, if they, give, kind of details about how it happened, where, positioning, dates, times, places, to me, that's something worth looking into. Then secondly, you have Vigano, who comes along later on and corroborates that and says, well, look, I also have reports from other novices who reported Francis doing the same thing. And then if you look at Francis himself, if a person is a homosexual, he's going to be more comfortable in the presence with other homosexuals, his friends. In other words, Joe, if I invite you, if you come to State College to visit me, and I take you to a gay bar, what are you going to assume, Joe? That I'm gay, right? Okay. I mean, why would I take somebody to a gay bar if I'm not gay? So why is it that Francis put Monsignor Battista Ricca in charge of his residence at the Casa Santa Marta in the Vatican, when Battista Ricca had a live-in boyfriend, Patrick Harris, who was a former Swiss guard in Paraguay, who was caught having sex with a gay prostitute in an elevator, and who also was found to have been beaten up in a gay park? Why would a straight person want someone with that background to be in charge of his residence?
Yeah, it's bad at best, and it's worse at worst. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like the wolves are running the hen house here. So let me flip this back to Anthony Gorgia and his family. Something we talked about a few minutes ago was how many seminarians go sort of naively to these seminaries. One, I'm thinking, can you as a parent, I don't know that I could recommend my sons to the seminary at this point. It feels like you're not sure what you're giving them over to. How much can you trust? Are there good seminaries? I guess that's one question. Can you recommend one at all? And number two, how is his family dealing with the fallout of this case that now has stretched into years, and the financial cost of which must be really daunting to them? So I guess let's start with that first one. Are there any seminaries that you would recommend?
At this point, there is not one seminary that I can say with a degree of assurance that a straight young man would be safe in attending. In other words, when I was in a seminary in Loretto, Pennsylvania, if I went to you and you're the rector and I said, well, so-and-so came on to me when I was in a shower in my room or whatever, the rector would call him in and investigate. And if he found that my allegations were credible, the person whom I accused would be gone the next day. But again, today that's not happening. And so when I published a report about seminaries in the United States, I sent it to every rector in every seminary in the United States with my findings. And if I said that we have this problem and you are the rector and you don't have that problem, I would think you would get back to me and say, Monsignor, Father Gene, whatever, I just want you to know that if you recommended someone to study at my seminary, he's not going to have that problem. But no one got back to me, Joe. No one said, hey, we don't have that problem here in, St. Meinrad's or St. Mary's in Baltimore or wherever. No one came back. So there's silence. If somebody accuses me of something and I'm innocent, I'm immediately going to object and I'm going to ask for an investigation. But because they did not object, I can't therefore say, I know that some places may be better than others. For example, I believe that somewhere like in this area, Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, I believe has less of a problem there than they do at St. Mary's in Baltimore, which is, within an hour away. But can I absolutely be sure that the rector there and the faculty and the students, are going to protect this straight young man if somebody were to come on to him? And I can't say that for sure.
What about religious orders? Are there any religious orders that you think are better than others when it comes to this?
Well, Joe, remember historically, and this goes way back, even if you go back to Peter Daniel, okay? Religious orders traditionally had a higher number of homosexuals in their community. So that it was estimated, this was even like 20 years ago, they estimated that amongst especially the Jesuits, if you looked at the number of people who were dying of AIDS, back in the 90s and in the early 2000s, you saw that the Jesuits and some of the Franciscans were devastated, by the number of deaths within their communities who were dying of AIDS. So I have a hard time, recommending even a particular order, because I'm not going to make a recommendation or at the same time make an accusation unless I have some foundation. Now, I know that in my diocese here in Pennsylvania, there were 2 seminarians studying for the diocese, and the bishop sent them to St. Mary's in Baltimore. They lasted within only 6 months. Now, I know that Baltimore had the reputation, again, of being called the Pink Palace. But, some people will say, well, all of that has changed now. But do you really believe that Archbishop Laurie, who covered up the abuse of Carl Discher, who reported being abused to Cardinal Christophe Pierre, that when he was at St. Mary's, that's changed? No. So when I look at the hardcore evidence, when I read the reports from the seminarians and they describe who, in other words, Discher identified former transitional deacon Christopher Pinto as being the one who abused him. So when you identify specifics, and then when you see that neither the seminary nor the archbishop nor the apostolic nuncio investigated those allegations, which caused then Discher to leave, and not only affects Discher, but as also in the case of like Anthony Gorgia, when a seminarian is mistreated like this, it just doesn't affect his faith, but it affects the faith of the whole family. Because in many of these cases, these families, like the Dischers and the Gorgias, they were super devout. They prayed the rosary. They went to mass all the time. Anthony was an altar boy. He was a lector. An extraordinary minister of the Eucharist. He was the master of ceremonies in his parish. He went to all the masses on Sunday to help out. And the Dischers were the same way. Jennifer Discher, whose son was abused, at St. Mary's, and also at St. John Paul II in Washington. Now, the Dischers were very devout. Jennifer Discher was a lay Dominican. And so when these families are when their sons are destroyed like this, it destroys their faith, because not only are they angry at the people who abuse their sons, or the seminary, or the archbishop or bishop who covers it up, but they also feel isolated and alienated and let down by their own parishioners, because in many cases, the parishioners say, oh, there must be something wrong with your son. Your son must have done something wrong. Oh, the Holy Father or the bishop, oh, well, he should appeal to the Rome. He should write to the Holy Father. The Holy Father, will do something. Come on, give me a break.
Right. All right. So let's talk about Anthony's family. What has been the effect on Anthony's family as a result of this case?
It's devastated their faith. Like I say, they used to sponsor gatherings in their backyard. They have it's like a mini Lourdes. They have a grotto. They built it, and the statue of the Blessed Virgin is there and candles on the side. It's a beautiful backyard. And parishioners from their parish, Our Lady Star of the Sea, would come there to pray the rosary. They gather and they pray the rosary, and Maria Gorgia would serve them all these Italian meals. She'd cook up a storm, and they would spend the whole day there, sometimes till late at night, because it was this was their life. The church was their life. They immigrated, from Italy, their mother, and sacrificed, to put these children through Catholic schools and so forth. So the church was their whole life. And remember, Maria Gorgia had 2 miscarriages. And when she never thought that they would get pregnant, but then Anthony came along, he almost lost them. Okay. It was a difficult birth. So when Anthony was 6 years old, and he said to his parents, I think God is calling me to be a priest. Now, if you have one child, your Italian family, what do you want? You want grandchildren, right? Of course. But the Gorgias are very, very, very devout Catholics. They don't want to go against God. So they gave Anthony their blessing. And so when Anthony grew up, and did exceptionally well, as I said, exceptionally intelligent, giving, but a kind, loving, and a very, very, very humble person with integrity, they were so proud of him. So when they found that he was being appointed to the North American College in Rome, because, and especially as an Italian family, speaking Italian and so forth, it would be like the perfect fit. They were so proud. And then to have this happen to them, it devastated them, their whole faith. And they wrote to the cardinal, they wrote to Dolan, and Dolan wrote a dismissive letter back, and it was even stained with coffee on it, saying, well, don't bother me, so their faith was just totally destroyed. So, when people from the neighborhood come, oh, Maria, could we pray the rosary again? Goodbye. You guys were not there for us, and it's interesting too, because the pastor of the parish, Our Lady Star of the Sea, was removed with two abuse cases against him.
Isn't that something? Well, there are millstones made for such occasions, and James warned us in his epistle that to those who are given much, much is expected, most especially bishops and priests. And God help you if you cause the least of these little ones to be scandalized. And boy, oh boy, there's going to be a lot of reckoning on the judgment day. I'm just saying. Hey, Father, we're down to the wire here. I want to give a special another shout out here to the fundraiser. I think this is important. GoFundMe.com/Save Our Seminarians Fund. I'm going to put a link to it in the video description, of course, the show notes as well. And if you can support Anthony's case, help him, in this case, that'd be amazing. You can find all the details there. We're going to link to it, as well as the article by Father Gene Gomulka, Ordination Does Not Impact Sexual Discipline. And you can stay up to date on the case in his latest articles as well. We'll put all of that in the links. But Father, thank you for your time today, bringing us up to date. This is hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. And I think many people would walk away from the church. And I think now is the time to double down on our faith and remain faithful, because as something I like to say is, it's time for us to turn the light of Christ on so we can watch the cockroaches scramble around the kitchen. They need not believe that they own the kitchen. They don't. And it's time that we took it back. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, we're not going to give up without a fight, Joe. If we don't speak out, and if we don't take a stand, if we don't expose this, what's going to happen? I mean, right now there are, it's a fight, but with people like yourself and your listeners out there, we're not going to go down. We're not going to let them take our position without a fight, Joe.
Amen. Well said. Father Gene, God bless you. God love you. Thank you for being on with us today.
Thank you for having me, Joe. God bless you too. Bye-bye.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.